When I talk to people in rural communities and I ask them what climate change means to them and what climate action has meant to them, they tell me that it means higher taxes, higher costs on products for which they have no alternatives, job losses and greater fear for their livelihoods, particularly farming families. The climate crisis is real. The need for a climate action bill is real. But so too is the need for this House and for government to recognise the real concerns and the realities of ordinary workers, families and rural communities. And the biggest problem, I have to say, that I have is the confidence that any of the parties in government can actually address those concerns and realise the difficulties of the realities that I've outlined. I heard one Fianna Fáil TD assert that perhaps the problem was the lack of a Fianna Fáil minister from the Midlands in Cabinet. I would have to say that the real problem is the lack of any ambition or vision for rural communities within Fianna Fáil or within this government as a whole. In fact, none of the parties that make up the government, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or the Green Party, can be trusted, in my view, to deliver for either the environment or for rural communities. And I base that entirely on their track record. The Green Party in particular have adopted a policy of simply exporting whatever they perceive to be problems. And a really good example of that has been the approach to horticultural peat. The Green Party have driven an agenda that has been, by and large, facilitated by their government partners of banning the cultivation of horticultural peat, a key component in vital sectors of rural communities, such as the mushroom industry, for example. And when asked, they tell us that those sectors need to find alternatives. But when you actually engage with them, as I did with Minister Ryan in this very chamber, and ask what are the alternatives, the alternative is importing peat from outside of the state. Now, that isn't climate action. That's hypocrisy. And if it's the same approach that we take from peat to beef, for example, that's hypocrisy that will absolutely devastate rural communities for absolutely no benefit for the environment whatsoever. If we were to suggest, as we apparently are, that we reduce the number of suckler farmers and suckler beef cows being produced along the west or the border regional Midlands of this country, and on the other hand agree, as this government have done, to a Mercosur trade deal that will see the importation of 100,000 tonnes of additional Brazilian beef entering the European market, that's not climate action, that's hypocrisy. And we need the state bodies and government agencies to take responsibility. People want and are asking for fairness. I've spoken to many dairy farmers who have expanded in recent years. Many young farmers were told that dairy is the sector for you. They were told by ministers, by state agencies, by financial institutions that they needed to go into dairy and they needed to expand in dairy, and yet this week they're being told that there's a limit in terms of the amount of milk that they're going to produce. But nobody's suggesting that there'll be less milk consumed. Only question that is left unanswered is where that milk will actually produce. So if we're just going to suggest that we reduce food production in Ireland, but the answer is that we actually import from more intensive production countries such as the South Americas, well then that's not climate action, that's hypocrisy. If we're serious, because I've listened to government representatives all throughout this debate, talking about just transition, talking about fairness for rural communities, none of them have specified what that actually means in reality. So I would put it up to them two challenges. One is that we rural-proof the policies to ensure that the response to climate action that we all agree needs to happen doesn't disproportionately impact those people who have suffered as a result of virtually all other government policies, whether it be regional development or whether it be the wider economic policies driven by successive governments. And if we're going to be serious about climate action, let's get serious about those who are primarily responsible for the climate crisis. That's the big corporations, those people who will actually find it the easiest to transition to alternatives. Those who can't transition to alternatives in the short term without government support needed to be facilitated. That's ordinary workers, that's ordinary families, and that's the rural communities of our country.